For 3 months of marriage, he ignored her, until one night, her selfie made him drop everything and run to her. Please don't skip this story. If you don't want the 30-second introduction, you can skip it, but don't miss the story. I love you like my own family. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to your own family channel. May the Almighty pour His light into your hearts and guide every step you take with peace, wisdom, and strength. May He bless every woman with endless grace and beauty that reflects heaven itself, and every man with courage and compassion to protect that love. May your homes overflow with laughter, your tables never lack food, and your nights rest gently under God's care. I pray that every tear turns into joy, every pain into purpose, and every dream into a shining reality. May no darkness ever touch your soul, and may divine favor follow you wherever you go. If your heart is true, like the video, if your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. Some women marry for love. Paula Leal married for survival and discovered that survival in a billionaire's world meant dying a little every day. The wedding dress cost more than her mother's annual salary. Paula knew this because Constance Lloyd had mentioned it 3 times during the fitting, her thin lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Imported silk," she had said, running her fingers over the fabric with the kind of reverence most people reserved for holy relics. "And beaded. The designer usually has a waiting list, but for my son's wedding, exceptions were made." Paula had stood on the raised platform, pins holding the dress to her body, and wondered if she was the exception or the mistake. Now, standing at the altar with 500 guests watching her every breath, Paula felt the weight of that silk pressing down on her shoulders like chains made of clouds. Beautiful chains. Expensive chains, but chains nonetheless. Peter Lloyd stood beside her, tall and devastating in his tailored suit, his jaw carved from granite, his eyes the color of winter storms. He was looking at her. But Paula couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking through her, past her, towards something she couldn't see. The minister's voice droned on about love and commitment, words that felt hollow in the cathedral's vast space. Paula's mother, Miriam Leal, sat in the 3rd row, not the first, because the first 2 rows were reserved for the Lloyd family and their distinguished guests. Miriam wore her best dress, the navy one she saved for special occasions, and her eyes were wet with tears that could have been joy or could have been grief. Last night, Miriam had held Paula's hands in their small apartment, the place Paula had grown up, the place she was leaving behind. "Baby," her mother had whispered, "you don't have to do this. Money can't warm a cold bed. I raised you alone and we survived just fine." Paula had pulled her hands away gently. "Mama, I love him. Does he love you?" The question had hung in the air between them, unanswered, because Paula didn't know. Peter had pursued her with an intensity that felt like passion, had proposed after 3 months with a ring that caught fire in the sunlight, had promised her a life beyond her wildest dreams. But love, that word had never crossed his lips. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The guests erupted in applause. Peter turned to Paula, and for one breathless moment, she thought she saw something real in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or longing. He lifted her veil with careful fingers, leaned in and kissed her. It was a perfect kiss, the kind photographers dream of capturing. It was also the coldest thing Paula had ever felt. The reception was a blur of champagne and congratulations from people Paula didn't know. Duncan Lloyd, Peter's father, gave a speech about legacy and the importance of carrying on the family name. He didn't mention Paula once. Constance stood beside her husband, her smile frozen in place, her eyes tracking Paula's every movement, as if watching for proof that this marriage was the disaster she clearly believed it would be. Peter's sister, Juliet Lloyd Brennan, found Paula during the dancing. She was blonde, polished, perfect in the way that came from generations of wealth and breeding. "Welcome to the family," she said, air-kissing both of Paula's cheeks without actually touching her skin. "I hope you understand what you've gotten yourself into." "I married your brother," Paula replied, her voice steady, despite the champagne making her head light. "I think I understand perfectly." Juliet's smile sharpened. "Do you? Peter isn't like normal men. He doesn't have time for the usual nonsense, romance, feelings, all that tedious emotional maintenance. He has responsibilities, the company, the family, the legacy. If you thought marrying him meant candlelit dinners and whispered sweet nothings, you're going to be very disappointed." Paula felt something cold settle in her chest. "He loves me, does he?" Juliet tilted her head, studying Paula like a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "Or did he need a wife, and you were there at the right time, pretty enough to justify the choice?" Before Paula could respond, Peter's younger brother, Dominic Lloyd, appeared at her elbow. Where Juliet was ice, Dominic was warmth. He was only a few years younger than Peter, but there was a lightness to him, a sense of freedom that his older brother lacked. "Ignore her," Dominic said, offering Paula his hand for a dance. "Juliet thinks cruelty is a personality trait. Come on, the bride should dance with her new brother." As they moved across the floor, Dominic leaned in close. "You're good for him, you know. Peter's been alone for a long time, even when he was surrounded by people. Maybe you'll change that." "Maybe," Paula said, but the word felt like a lie. The night wore on. Paula danced with strangers who told her how lucky she was. She smiled until her face hurt. She thanked people for gifts she hadn't opened. She played the role of the blushing bride perfectly, even as something inside her began to crack. Finally, after midnight, they left for the Lloyd mansion. Not Peter's penthouse in the city, but the family estate where he'd grown up, a sprawling monument to wealth that sat on acres of manicured grounds. The house staff had prepared the master suite, filling it with flowers and champagne, setting the scene for a wedding night that should have been magical. Peter walked into the bedroom ahead of Paula, loosening his tie with mechanical efficiency. She stood in the doorway, still in her wedding dress, watching him. "You can change in the bathroom," he said without looking at her. "There should be something comfortable for you to wear." Paula's heart, which had been hammering with nervousness and anticipation, began to slow. "Peter, I'm exhausted," he said, shrugging off his jacket. "Today was overwhelming. All those people, all that noise. I need to sleep. It's our wedding night." He finally looked at her, and the distance in his eyes made her feel like she was falling. "I know what night it is, Paula, but I'm tired. We have our whole lives ahead of us. One night won't matter." He walked past her, past the flowers and the champagne, past the bed that was meant for them, and disappeared into his study. Paula heard the door close with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. She stood alone in the master suite, surrounded by luxury she'd never dreamed of, wearing a dress that cost more than everything she'd ever owned, and felt more isolated than she'd ever been in her life. She thought about her mother's apartment, small and cramped, but filled with love. She thought about her own bed, narrow and old but warm. She thought about the life she'd left behind, the life she'd traded for this golden cage. Paula walked to the mirror and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her was beautiful. There was no denying that. Her dark skin glowed against the white silk. Her eyes, usually bright with laughter, now held something else, fear, confusion, the first stirrings of anger. She began to remove the dress, piece by piece, letting it pool on the floor like a cloud. Underneath, she wore delicate white lace, chosen with such hope just hours ago, hope that now felt foolish. She found the comfortable clothes Peter had mentioned, silk pajamas, expensive and impersonal, probably selected by the housekeeper. She put them on and climbed into the massive bed alone. The sheets were cold. The room was silent. Through the walls, she couldn't hear any sound from Peter's study. This was her wedding night. This was the beginning of her new life. This was what she had chosen. Paula closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but all she could hear was Juliet's voice echoing in her head. Did he love you, or did he just need a wife? By dawn, when pale light began filtering through the heavy curtains, Paula still hadn't found an answer. But she had made a decision. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't be the pathetic wife who pined for a husband who didn't want her. She would survive this. She would find a way to make this marriage real. Or she would find a way to leave with her dignity intact. What Paula didn't know, as she finally drifted into restless sleep, was that Peter was awake in his study, staring at the wall, his hands trembling with the effort of staying away from her. That the distance between them wasn't indifference, it was fear so profound it had paralyzed him. That first night Peter slept in his study. The second night he didn't come home at all. By the third night, Paula realized she hadn't married a man, she'd married a ghost. And in the quiet darkness of the Lloyd mansion, two people lay awake in separate rooms, both convinced they'd made a terrible mistake, neither brave enough to cross the distance between them and find out if they were right. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Loneliness. The Lloyd mansion had 42 rooms. Paula had counted them all in her first week of marriage, walking the halls like a beautifully dressed prisoner, searching for a cell that felt like home. The East Wing held guest suites that never hosted guests. The West Wing contained a library of unread books and a music room with a silent piano. The ground floor offered separate rooms for morning, afternoon, and evening, as if different times of day required different spaces for doing nothing. The kitchen was the only place that felt alive. Dinah Garrett, the housekeeper, ruled it with quiet efficiency. She watched Paula with sharp eyes and softer hands. "Tea, Mrs. Lloyd?" Dinah would ask each morning. "Just Paula," Paula would say. "Please." "Of course, Mrs. Lloyd." It was a small battle, but Paula was losing it. Peter left before dawn. Paula knew because she heard his car pulling away. He returned after dark, if he returned at all. Some nights he slept at his penthouse. Either way, Paula didn't see him. She ate breakfast alone. Dinah served perfectly prepared meals on delicate china. The morning sun streamed through spotless windows. The silence pressed against her ears until she wanted to scream. After breakfast, Paula tried to fill the hours. She explored the gardens, walked through the library, considered decorating their bedroom, but stopped when she realized Peter would never notice. One afternoon, she found Peter's childhood room. Trophies, photographs, a worn stuffed bear tucked away like an embarrassing secret. She held that bear and tried to imagine the child Peter had been. "He was a sweet boy," came a voice from the doorway. Constance Lloyd stood there, elegant and cold. Before his father got hold of him, Paula set the bear down carefully. "I didn't mean to intrude." "This is your home now," Constance said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Though I wonder why you're spending time in dusty old rooms instead of with your husband." The comment landed like a slap. "Peter's very busy. Lloyd men don't make easy husbands. They're married to their work first. Everything else comes second." Constance walked closer. "I learned that lesson. Juliet learned it watching me. And now you're learning it too. Did you love Duncan?" Paula asked suddenly. "When you married him?" The question caught Constance off guard. Her perfect mask slipped. "I loved the idea of him," she said finally. "But ideas don't keep you warm at night, do they?" She left without another word, leaving Paula with the growing realization that her marriage might not be an exception. It might be a family tradition. That evening, Paula tried something different. She prepared Peter's favorite meal, set the table herself, lit candles. She wore a dress that made her feel beautiful. Then she waited. Peter came home just after 9. When he saw her, he paused mid-sentence on his phone. For one hopeful moment, she thought something would change. "I need to take this call," he said. "Don't wait up for me." He was gone before she could respond. Paula sat at that carefully set table and ate dinner alone. The food tasted like ash, and something inside her, the last remnants of the hopeful bride she'd been, finally broke. She called Keisha that night. "Girl," Keisha said without preamble, "I've been giving you space, but if you tell me everything's fine—" "It's not fine," Paula whispered. "Keisha, I think I made a mistake. Get out of that house. You married him for love, but he didn't marry you for the same reason. I can't just leave. I'm his wife. You're his wife in name only. Baby, you're too beautiful, too strong to waste your life waiting for a man who can't see what he has." Keisha's voice softened. "Come home. Your mama misses you. I miss you." Paula looked around her bedroom, the enormous bed, the expensive furniture, the window overlooking grounds so perfect they looked fake. "I don't know how to give up. This isn't giving up. This is saving yourself." But Paula didn't leave. Pride kept her there. She would find a way through this. She would make him see her. Days turned into weeks. Peter remained a ghost. A coffee cup in the study, a tie on a chair, his scent in hallways. They were married, but they were strangers. Juliet came to visit with her perfect blonde friends. They had lunch on the terrace, talking about galas and summer homes, speaking around Paula as if she were decoration. "It must be quite an adjustment," one said, her smile sharp. "Going from whatever you did before to all of this." "I was a teacher," Paula said evenly. "I helped children learn to read." "How noble," the woman replied in a tone that made nobility sound like a character flaw. After her friends left, Juliet stayed behind. "You're handling them well. Better than I expected. Is this a test?" Paula asked. "Your mother's disdain, your friend's cruelty. Is this the Lloyd family's way of breaking me down?" "No," Juliet said simply. "This is just who we are. Cruelty is the language we speak. If you can't learn it, you won't survive here. Maybe I don't want to survive like that." Only Dominic showed her genuine kindness. He stopped by sometimes, bringing books. "Oh, give him time," Dominic would say. "Peter's not good at being human. Our father trained it out of him." "How much time?" Paula asked once. "How long am I supposed to wait?" Dominic didn't have an answer. Late at night, alone in that too-big bed, Paula would stare at the ceiling and wonder what she'd traded her old life for. She'd given up her apartment, her job, her independence. And for what? To live in a golden cage with a man who treated her like an obligation. One night she found Peter in his study. She stood in the doorway, gathering her courage. "Peter!" He looked up, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Paula, it's late. You should be asleep." "I am asleep," she said. "I've been asleep since our wedding night. I'm just waiting to wake up. I don't understand. I know. That's the problem." She stepped into the room. "We've been married for weeks, and you've barely touched me. I don't know if you regret marrying me, or if you're afraid of me, but I need to know. I deserve to know." Peter stood, his hands clenching. "It's not like that. Then what is it like? Because this isn't a marriage. It's a business arrangement where I didn't read the fine print. I'm trying to protect you," he said, his voice cracking. "From me, from this life. I didn't marry you so you could protect me," Paula said. "I married you because I loved you, but I'm starting to wonder if you're capable of loving anyone back." The words hung between them. Peter looked like she'd struck him. Finally he said, "You should get some sleep. We can talk about this another time." "When?" Paula demanded. "When will you be my husband instead of a stranger?" "I don't know," he said, and the honesty in those 3 words was more devastating than any lie. Paula left and climbed into bed, feeling colder than she'd ever felt in her life. The Lloyd mansion had 42 rooms, and Paula had counted every single one. But not one of them felt like home. By the end of her first month in the mansion, Paula made a decision. She wouldn't beg anymore. She wouldn't wait anymore. She wouldn't slowly disappear in this beautiful, empty house. If Peter Lloyd thought he could ignore her forever, he was about to learn something about the woman he'd married. Paula Leal had never been invisible in her life, and she wouldn't start now. And as she lay in that enormous bed, Paula began to plan her rebellion. Chapter 3: The Empire's Prisoner. Peter Lloyd built his fortune by denying himself everything: pleasure, rest, weakness. Then he married Paula, and suddenly had something he desperately wanted but was terrified to touch. He stared at the contract spread across his desk, the words blurring together. Numbers that should have commanded his attention seemed trivial. All he could think about was the woman sleeping down the hall, and the look on her face when he'd failed her again. This was the third night this week he'd slept in his study. The leather chair was uncomfortable, but discomfort was familiar. Comfort was dangerous. Comfort led to complacency, and complacency destroyed empires. At least, that's what Duncan Lloyd had taught his son from the moment Peter was old enough to understand words. A Lloyd never shows weakness, his father had said countless times. Emotions are for lesser men. We deal in facts, in strategy, in power. Everything else is a distraction that will destroy everything we've built. Peter had watched his father live that philosophy. Duncan Lloyd never missed a day of work, never took a vacation, never showed affection to his wife or children. He was respected, feared, successful. He was also profoundly alone. Peter had promised himself he'd be different. And then his father had pulled him aside during the wedding reception and said, "You've made your choice. Now make sure it doesn't cost you everything I've given you." The threat was clear. Love your wife or lead the company, but you can't do both. She'll ruin you, Garrett Finch had said the week before the wedding. Garrett was Duncan's right hand, speaking with the authority of someone who'd been there from the beginning. I've seen it happen before. A man loses focus, starts prioritizing feelings over facts, and the whole empire crumbles. Peter had defended Paula then, but the words had burrowed into his brain. What if they were right? What if loving her meant failing at everything else? So he'd made a decision on their wedding night, standing in that bedroom, watching Paula in her white dress, so beautiful it physically hurt to look at her. He'd felt desire so intense it terrified him, the urge to forget everything except her, to let the rest of the world burn if it meant he could keep her. That terror had sent him running to his study. He'd told himself it was temporary. Once the current project stabilized, once he proved his marriage hadn't affected his focus, then he'd be able to be the husband Paula deserved. But days turned into weeks, and the distance between them grew wider. Every morning, he left before dawn, unable to face her disappointment. Every evening he stayed late, afraid of what might happen if he went home. And every night he lay awake thinking about her, wanting her, hating himself for his cowardice. His assistant, Leonard Cross, had started looking at him with concern. "Sir, you've rescheduled the Hashimoto meeting twice now." Peter had snapped at him, something he never did. "Then they can be patient or find someone else." Garrett had noticed too. "You're losing your edge. Your decisions are slower. Your focus is scattered." "I'm fine," Peter had said through gritted teeth. "You're not, and everyone can see it." Garrett leaned forward. "Your father warned you about this. Whatever's happening between you and your wife, fix it or end it, but don't let it destroy everything you've worked for." Fix it or end it, as if Paula were a problem to be solved or discarded. But wasn't that exactly how he was treating her? Avoiding her, ignoring her, acting like she was an obligation instead of the person he'd promised to love? Peter stood from his desk and walked to the window. The grounds were dark, the gardens invisible. Somewhere in this massive house, Paula was sleeping alone, again, because of him. His phone buzzed. A message from Duncan. "Board meeting tomorrow. Don't be late. We need to discuss your performance." Performance. As if his life were a quarterly report to be analyzed and critiqued. Peter thought about his mother, Constance, beautiful and cold, married to a man who treated her like an expensive accessory. He thought about Juliet, who'd married someone just like their father. He thought about what Paula had asked him. "Are you capable of loving anyone back?" He wanted to say yes. He wanted to prove it. But every time he tried to move toward her, he heard his father's voice. Weakness destroys empires. What Duncan had never taught him was that loneliness could destroy them too. Peter returned to his desk and pulled out the bottom drawer. Hidden beneath folders was a photograph. Paula on their wedding day, laughing at something Dominic had said. She looked radiant, alive, full of joy. He traced her face with one finger, his chest aching. The truth was, he loved her. He'd loved her from the moment they met, when she'd been teaching at that community center. She'd been helping a little girl sound out words, her patience infinite, her smile like sunlight. She hadn't known who he was, hadn't cared about his money. She'd just looked at him and seen him, really seen him, in a way no one ever had. He'd asked her to dinner. She'd said no. She didn't date men who thought money could buy everything. So he'd come back the next week and volunteered. And the week after that. He'd spent months earning her trust, proving he was more than his bank account. Proposing had been the easiest decision of his life. Marrying her should have been the beginning of everything. Instead, he'd let fear turn it into the beginning of nothing. A soft sound made him look up. Paula stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked ethereal, like something he dreamed. "You're still awake," she said quietly. "I couldn't sleep." The truth. For once, she stepped into the room, close enough now that he could smell her perfume, see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Peter, I can't keep doing this. Living with you, but not living with you. I need to know if you regret this, regret me." "No," he said, immediately standing. "Paula, no. I don't regret you. I've never regretted you. Then why won't you touch me?" Her voice broke. "Why won't you even look at me?" He wanted to lie, to deflect. But she was standing there with tears in her eyes, and he couldn't do it anymore. "Because I'm afraid," he said, the words torn from somewhere deep inside him. "I'm afraid that if I let myself have you, I'll stop being the man my father needs me to be. I'm afraid I'll lose myself in you, and then I'll lose everything else, and you'll end up hating me for it." Paula stared at him, her expression shifting to anger. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." He blinked, startled. "What?" "Peter, I didn't marry you because of your company or your legacy. I married you because of who you were, when you showed up at that community center week after week, when you looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered." She moved closer. "That man, the one who wasn't afraid to be human, that's who I fell in love with. But that man disappeared the moment we got married. I'm trying to protect us," he said desperately. "To protect you from the pressure from my father." "I don't need protection," Paula interrupted. "I need a husband. I need the man I married to stop hiding behind his fear and actually fight for this marriage." "You don't understand what it's like," Peter said. "The pressure, the constant demands, everyone watching and waiting for me to fail." "You're right, I don't understand. Because I come from a world where family means something different, where love isn't seen as weakness." She put her hand on his chest, right over his racing heart. "But I'm willing to learn your world if you're willing to remember mine, if you're willing to meet me halfway instead of running away." Peter covered her hand with his. "I don't know how to do this, how to be what you need, and what my father needs, and what the company needs." "Maybe you need to stop trying to be what everyone else needs and start figuring out what you need," Paula said softly. "Because you need your wife. You need someone who sees past the empire and loves the man underneath." She was right. God, she was right. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For all of it. For our wedding night, for these weeks of distance, for making you feel like you don't matter. You matter more than anything. That's exactly why I'm so terrified." Paula looked up at him, and for a moment he thought she might forgive him. Then she pulled her hand away and stepped back. "I'm going to bed," she said. "Our bed, the one we're supposed to share. You're welcome to join me anytime you're ready to stop being afraid. But I'm done waiting for you to figure yourself out while I slowly disappear in this house." She turned and walked out, leaving Peter alone in his study with the ghost of her touch still burning on his chest. He looked down at the contracts, at the photograph of Paula, at the life he'd built that suddenly felt like a prison. And he realized that Garrett was right about one thing. He was losing his edge. But not because of Paula, because of his refusal to let himself have her. He was destroying both their lives, one cowardly night at a time. Peter sat back down, put his head in his hands, and for the first time since his childhood allowed himself to cry. Not for the empire he might lose, or his father's approval he'd never fully have. He cried for the woman he loved and was too afraid to hold. and for the marriage he was killing through inaction. Outside his study, dawn was breaking. Another day was beginning, and Peter Lloyd had no idea how to fix what he'd broken, but he knew he had to try, because the alternative, a lifetime of this crushing loneliness, was no longer something he could survive. Chapter 4. The Fire Beneath the Surface. Paula Leal had never begged for anything in her life. Her mother raised her in a cramped apartment with dignity, teaching her that a black woman's pride was her armor, and Paula wore hers like a queen. But armor could crack. She stood in the shower the morning after her confrontation with Peter, letting water hot enough to hurt wash over her. The conversation replayed in her mind. His fear, his weakness, his pathetic excuses wrapped in the language of protection. She'd offered him a chance to be real, to be human, to be her husband, and he'd let her walk away. Again. Paula turned off the water and stared at herself in the fogged mirror. Her reflection was indistinct, blurred around the edges, and she wondered if that's what she was becoming, a woman slowly fading into the background of her own life. No. The thought came fierce and immediate. She'd been raised by a woman who'd survived everything life threw at her with her head held high. Miriam Leal had worked 2 jobs to give Paula opportunities she'd never had. She'd faced discrimination, poverty, exhaustion, and never once had she diminished herself to make anyone else comfortable. Paula Leal was her mother's daughter. She wouldn't disappear for anyone, not even the man she'd married. She dressed carefully that morning, choosing a dress that made her feel powerful, rigid, bold, and unapologetic. If Peter was too much of a coward to see her, fine, but she would damn well make sure she saw herself. Dinah was in the kitchen when Paula came down. The housekeeper looked up from the coffee she was preparing, and something flickered across her face. Approval. Maybe a recognition. "Good morning, Mrs. Lloyd." "Good morning, Dinah." Paula accepted the coffee, noting how Dinah's eyes lingered on the red dress. "Is there something on your mind?" Dinah hesitated, the first crack Paula had seen in her professional demeanor. "It's not my place to say, but you want to." The older woman met Paula's eyes directly. "I've worked for this family for many years. I've seen 3 generations of Lloyd wives fade into the furniture, turning themselves inside out, trying to earn love from men who don't know how to give it. You're the first one I've seen fight back." The words hung in the air between them. "Is that a warning or encouragement?" "Both," Dinah said. "This family destroys what it doesn't understand. But you're different. You have fire. Don't let them extinguish it." Paula's phone rang before she could respond. Her mother's name lit up the screen, and she answered gratefully. "Mama?" "Baby girl?" Miriam's voice was warm, concerned, everything Paula needed. "How are you?" "I'm fine. Don't lie to your mother. I can hear it in your voice. That man still treating you like a house guest instead of a wife?" Paula moved to the terrace, away from Dinah's knowing eyes. The morning was beautiful. Perfect blue sky, manicured gardens, the kind of wealth that should have brought happiness. "It's complicated." "It's not complicated," Miriam said firmly. "Either he loves you and acts like it, or he doesn't. There's no in-between. I didn't raise you to accept scraps from anyone, no matter how rich they are." Tears pricked Paula's eyes. "I love him, Mama." "I know you do, baby. But love can't be one-sided. You can't pour everything you have into someone who won't even pick up the cup." Miriam's voice softened. "Come home. Come visit, at least. Let me feed you something real and remind you who you are." "I can't leave, not yet. If I leave now, it feels like giving up. And staying while he treats you like nothing, that's not giving up." Paula didn't have an answer for that. They talked a while longer about nothing and everything, and when they hung up, Paula felt stronger. Her mother was right. She couldn't keep living like this, waiting for Peter to become the man she needed him to be. She needed to remind him and herself exactly who Paula Leal was. Keisha called an hour later. "Girl, I know you said you didn't want visitors, but I'm getting on a plane tomorrow. Someone needs to check on you, and your mama's working doubles all week. You don't need to do that. Yes, I do. You sound like you're drowning, and I'm not about to let my best friend disappear into some mansion of misery. Keisha's voice turned fierce. I'm staying for the weekend, and we're going to remember what it's like to have fun. When's the last time you laughed, Paula? Really laughed? Paula tried to remember and couldn't. It's been a while. That's what I thought. So pack something that doesn't cost a month's salary and get ready to remember who you were before you became Mrs. Peter Lloyd. Keisha arrived the next day like a hurricane of normalcy. She took one look at the mansion and whistled low. Damn, this place is gorgeous and depressing as hell. Like a museum that forgot people are supposed to live here. Paula laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in weeks. That's exactly what it is. They spent the afternoon in Paula's rooms, and Keisha didn't hold back. So, let me get this straight. You married a man who pursued you for months, who seemed head over heels, who promised you the world, and then he stopped touching you the day you got married. It's not that simple. It really is that simple. He's either scared, stupid, or hiding something, and you're too good to waste your life figuring out which. What am I supposed to do? Leave? Maybe. Or maybe you make him see what he's missing. You're beautiful, Paula. You're smart, funny, kind, everything any man should want. If he's too blind to see that, make him see it. How? Keisha grinned, dangerous and delighted. Remember that guy in college who ignored you for a semester? The one who suddenly couldn't stop calling once he saw you with someone else. That was different. We weren't married. The psychology's the same. Men want what they think they're losing. Right now, Peter's comfortable with ignoring you because you're always there, always waiting. Show him you won't wait forever. Paula thought about it. The idea was manipulative, maybe even petty, but she'd tried everything else: patience, understanding, direct communication. Maybe it was time to speak a language Peter would actually hear. That evening, Constance Lloyd announced a family dinner. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. Paula dressed carefully, Keisha helping her choose something elegant but not submissive. You're a Lloyd now, Keisha reminded her. Act like you belong at that table, even if they don't think you do. The dining room was intimidating, all crystal and silver, the kind of setting where you could feel judged by the forks. Duncan sat at the head of the table, Constance at the foot. Juliet was there with her husband, Everett Brennan, a man who looked like he'd been carved from ice. Dominic arrived late, winking at Paula as he slid into his chair. Peter was the last to arrive, and Paula's breath caught when she saw him. He looked exhausted, haunted, like he hadn't slept in days. When their eyes met, she saw longing so intense it was almost painful. But he sat across from her, not beside her, putting the table between them like a barrier. Duncan launched into conversation immediately, directing questions at Peter about upcoming deals and quarterly projections. Peter answered mechanically, his focus never wavering from his father. Paula might as well have been invisible. Juliet turned to Paula with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How are you settling in? Must be quite different from what you're used to. It's an adjustment, Paula said evenly. But I'm adaptable. That's important in this family. We have standards to maintain. Juliet sipped her wine. Peter's had many opportunities over the years. Women who understood the life, who came from similar backgrounds. It was surprising when he chose someone so different. Everett, Juliet's husband, made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been a warning. Dominic looked ready to intervene, but Paula spoke first. I'm sure it was surprising, she said, her voice pleasant but her eyes steel. I was surprised too. I didn't realize love was supposed to come with a pedigree and a portfolio. The table went quiet. Duncan looked up from his conversation with Peter, his gaze sharp. Constance's mouth tightened. Juliet's smile froze. Only Dominic laughed. I like her, he said to Peter. She's got spine. You chose well. Peter's eyes were on Paula now, really on her for the first time all evening. She held his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to apologize for taking up space at this table. Paula, Duncan said, his voice cutting through the tension. "I don't believe we've had a proper conversation since the wedding. Tell me, what did you do before marrying my son?" It was a trap, and everyone at the table knew it. Paula set down her fork carefully. "I was a teacher. I worked at a community center in the city, helping children learn to read. Children whose families couldn't afford private tutors or expensive schools. Children who deserved a chance to succeed, regardless of what neighborhood they were born in." "How noble," Constance said, echoing Juliet's friend from weeks ago. "Though I imagine the salary was quite modest." "It was," Paula agreed. "But some things are worth more than money. Like knowing you're making a difference, like going to bed at night feeling like you mattered to someone." The implication hung in the air. Peter flinched like she'd slapped him. Duncan leaned back in his chair, studying Paula with new interest. "You have a sharp tongue, my dear." "I suppose that's necessary, given your background. You'd have to be tough to navigate. A world you weren't born into." "I was. Raised by a woman who taught me that dignity and respect aren't things you're born with. They're things you earn through how you treat people," Paula said. "I'm still waiting to see which kind of people the Lloyds are." The statement was bold, possibly too bold. Juliet looked scandalized. Constance looked outraged. Dominic looked delighted. And Peter looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her, and the hunger in his eyes was undeniable. But Duncan surprised everyone by laughing. It was a harsh sound, devoid of real humor, but it was something. "You've got fire," he said. "Peter could use someone with fire. God knows the rest of us are frozen solid." The rest of dinner passed in tense silence. Paula ate her food and refused to let them see her hands shake. When it was finally over and people began to disperse, Peter caught her arm in the hallway. "Paula," she pulled away. Don't apologize for them. Don't make excuses. Don't try to smooth this over. I'm done being the quiet wife who accepts being treated like she doesn't belong." "You do belong," he said desperately. "You're my wife." "Then act like I am," she said, and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway with all the words he'd never learned to say. Later that night, Keisha helped her process. "You were magnificent," her friend said. Did you see his face when you called them out?" "I saw," Paula said quietly. "I also saw that it changed nothing. He still didn't defend me, still didn't sit beside me, still treated me like an embarrassment he's too polite to acknowledge." "Then maybe it's time to stop being polite back," Keisha said. "You've tried patient. You've tried understanding. You've tried direct. Maybe it's time to try making him jealous, making him remember what he's losing." Paula thought about Peter's face at dinner, the hunger she'd seen when she'd stood up for herself. Thought about Dinah's words about fire. Thought about her mother's teaching that a woman should never diminish herself for anyone. "My mama always told me a story," Paula said slowly, "about how my father almost lost her. He was proud, stubborn, couldn't admit he needed her. So she stopped being available, stopped waiting, started living like he wasn't the center of her world. And suddenly he couldn't function without her. Suddenly he saw what he'd been taking for granted." Keisha grinned. "So what are you thinking?" Paula looked at herself in the mirror, the red dress, the fierce eyes, the woman who was slowly remembering who she'd been before she'd become Mrs. Peter Lloyd. "I'm thinking it's time Peter learned that ignoring me has consequences, that I'm not a painting on the wall or a piece of furniture. I'm a woman, and I deserve to be seen." "How are you going to do that?" Paula smiled, slow and dangerous. "I'm going to remind him what he married, what he's been too afraid to touch, what he's going to lose if he doesn't wake up and fight for this marriage." "I love it," Keisha said. "When?" "Soon," Paula promised. "Soon he's going to realize that having me and ignoring me are two very different things. And when he does, I'm going to make sure he understands that second chances are earned, not given." That night, Paula didn't cry herself to sleep. She didn't stare at the ceiling wondering what she'd done wrong. Instead, she began to plan. Because Paula Leal had never begged for anything in her life, and she wasn't about to start now, not even for love. If Peter Lloyd wanted his wife, he was going to have to prove he deserved her. And until then, Paula was going to remind him and herself that she was magnificent with or without him. Chapter 5. The Inheritance of Ice. The Lloyd family had a tradition. Love was a luxury, marriage was a merger, and emotions were liabilities to be eliminated from the balance sheet. Paula learned this the night of the gala. The invitation had arrived on heavy cardstock, embossed with gold lettering, Lloyd Industries' annual charity benefit. Black tie required, attendance mandatory. The word mandatory made Paula's jaw clench. Even charity was an obligation in this family. Constance appeared at the mansion the day before, carrying garment bags and an expression of grim determination. "We need to discuss your appearance tomorrow night. This is an important event. The right people will be watching." "The right people," Paula repeated. "As opposed to the wrong people?" "Ash. There are certain expectations when you represent the Lloyd name." Constance unzipped a garment bag, revealing a gown in muted champagne. "I had my designer create this for you. Conservative, elegant, nothing that will draw unnecessary attention." Paula looked at the dress. Beautiful, expensive, and completely designed to make her disappear. "I already have a dress?" "I'm sure you do. But trust me when I say no." The word came out firmer than Paula intended. "Thank you for the thought, but I'll wear my own dress. I'm Peter's wife, not a doll you get to dress up." For a moment, Constance looked like she might argue. Then something shifted in her expression. "You remind me of myself. When I first married Duncan, I had opinions too. I had fire. I thought I could change things. What happened?" Constance walked to the window. "I learned that Lloyd men don't change. They don't soften. Duncan's father was cold to his mother. Duncan is cold to me. And Peter is his father's son. You don't know that, don't I? Do you know what Duncan told him on your wedding day? He said, 'You've made your choice. Now make sure it doesn't cost you everything I've given you.'" Paula's chest tightened. That choosing me was a mistake. That choosing love over legacy would mean losing everything. Constance moved closer. "I'm trying to spare you the pain I've endured. This family doesn't do love, we do duty. We do appearance, but love? That's not in the Lloyd DNA. Then why did you stay?" Constance was quiet for a long moment. "Because by the time I realized what I'd married into, I had children. Because leaving would mean admitting failure. Because sometimes it's easier to live in a beautiful cage than to face the world outside it." After Constance left, Paula thought about becoming her in 20 years, elegant, refined, and completely hollow. No, she wouldn't accept that fate. The night of the gala, Paula wore her own dress. Emerald green silk that made her skin glow, that announced she was a woman who refused to fade. She wore her hair natural, her curls full and free. When she descended the stairs, Peter was waiting. He looked devastating in his tuxedo, but it was the expression on his face that made Paula's breath catch. Hunger, wonder, longing. "Paula," he breathed. "You look ready to represent the Lloyd name," she finished coolly, walking past him. The gala was everything Constance had warned. Photographers, reporters, hundreds of wealthy people pretending their charity made up for their excess. Paula smiled for cameras and played the role of the perfect wife, but she did it on her own terms. When someone asked about her background, she told them proudly about teaching. When someone made a veiled comment about her marriage, she met their eyes directly and refused to be embarrassed. And when Peter stayed by her side for exactly 10 minutes before being pulled away, Paula didn't follow or wait. She circulated on her own. Dominic found her by the champagne. "Décidez se faire des skills. You're causing quite a stir. Half the room can't stop staring at you." "I'm just being myself." "Exactly. That's what makes it revolutionary." Across the room, Paula saw Peter watching her. Their eyes met, and she saw hunger mixed with regret. Good. Let him regret. Let him see what he'd been ignoring. Duncan approached her later, whiskey in hand. "You're making quite an impression, my dear. I hope that's a good thing. It's an interesting thing. People are wondering what you see in him. Duncan took a sip. "I'm wondering the same thing." Paula met his gaze steadily. "I saw a man who seemed real, who seemed capable of being human. But lately, I'm wondering if I was wrong." Something flickered in Duncan's eyes. "You have courage. It takes courage to stand in a room full of vultures and refuse to pretend you belong with them." "I don't pretend to belong. I just refuse to pretend I don't." Duncan studied her. "Peter is weak. He always has been. Too soft, too emotional. I've spent years trying to train it out of him. Maybe survival isn't the only thing that matters. In my world, it's the only thing that matters. Love makes you vulnerable. Attachment makes you weak." Duncan's voice was cold. "Peter needs to learn that before his weakness destroys everything I've built. He's your son, not your employee. He's a Lloyd. That means he belongs to the legacy before he belongs to himself. Or to you." Duncan walked away, and Paula looked around the ballroom at the beautiful, cold people living beautiful, empty lives. She saw Constance beside Duncan, but might as well have been on another planet. She saw Juliet laughing too loud. She saw Peter surrounded by suited men, discussing things that mattered to everyone except the people they supposedly loved. And she saw herself in 20 years, still in this ballroom, still married to a man who looked at her like she mattered, but treated her like she didn't. The image made her physically ill. She found her way to the terrace, needing air. The night was cool, the city lights spread out below. "I thought I'd find you here." Peter stood in the doorway. He looked uncertain, almost fragile. "Shouldn't you be inside? Important people to impress?" He flinched. "Can we talk?" "We've talked. I've begged. What's left to say?" Peter stepped onto the terrace. "I saw you tonight. Really saw you. The way you held your head up when those women were judging you. The way you were magnificent without needing anyone's permission." His voice cracked. "And I realized I've been so busy being afraid of losing everything else that I've already lost the one thing that matters." Pretty words, Peter. You're good at those. You're less good at backing them up. "I know." He looked broken. "My father told me tonight that I'm destroying the family name, and all I could think was that I can't stop thinking about you. I can't focus on anything except the fact that my wife is sleeping alone every night while I hide like a coward." Paula wanted to soften, wanted to forgive, but she'd been disappointed too many times. "What do you want from me, Peter? Absolution? Permission to keep treating me like furniture?" "I want another chance," he said simply. "I want to prove I can be the man you deserve. You've had chances. Weeks of them, I know. And I have no excuse except that I was terrified. But tonight, watching you shine, I realized something. My father's wrong. Being hard, being cold, that's not strength. That's just fear wearing a different mask." He reached for her hand. She let him take it, feeling the tremor in his fingers. "The truth is, I love you. I've loved you from the moment I met you. And that love terrifies me because I don't know how to love without losing myself." "I don't want you to survive," Paula said softly. "I want you to live, but I can't teach you how. That has to come from you." "I know, and I'm asking for the chance to try." "No." Paula pulled her hand away. "No more chances, Peter. Either you want this marriage or you don't. Either you're willing to fight for us or you're not. But I'm done waiting for you to figure it out while I disappear." She walked past him, back toward the ballroom, and Peter stood alone on the terrace, finally understanding some losses mattered more than empires, and he was about to experience one he might never recover from. Chapter 6. The Silk Rebellion. Every revolution begins with a small act of defiance. Paula's revolution began with a shopping trip, a mirror, and the decision to remind her husband what he was sacrificing for his empire. Paula woke the morning after the gala with clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. The conversation with Peter on the terrace had crystallized something inside her. She was done waiting, done hoping, done being the patient wife who accepted crumbs and called it a feast. If Peter Lloyd couldn't see her, she would make him look. She called Keisha, who answered with her usual directness. "Tell me you're finally going to do something about this situation." "I am," Paula said, "but I need your help. Anything. Name it. Come with me shopping. I need clothes that make me feel like myself again. Not the appropriate Lloyd wife your mother-in-law wants you to be. Not the invisible woman I've been becoming. Just me." Keisha was on the doorstep within the hour. They took Paula's car, a wedding gift from Peter that she'd barely driven. A sleek black vehicle that probably cost more than her mother's annual salary. But today, Paula drove it like it belonged to her. Because it did. She was Mrs. Peter Lloyd, even if her husband seemed to have forgotten that fact. "Where are we going?" Keisha asked as Paula navigated through the city. "Somewhere that doesn't cater to Lloyd wives," Paula said. "Somewhere real." They ended up in the part of the city where Paula used to live, where the shops were small and personal, where the owners knew their customers by name. Paula had avoided this neighborhood since the wedding, afraid of how it would feel to return to her old life. But now, walking these familiar streets, she felt something loosen in her chest. This was her world. These were her people. And marrying Peter didn't mean she had to erase who she'd been. They spent hours shopping, trying on clothes that made Paula feel powerful. Not conservative gowns chosen to make her disappear, but vibrant silks and bold colors that celebrated her curves instead of hiding them. Emerald greens and deep purples, reds that demanded attention, golds that made her skin luminous. "This one," Keisha said, holding up a dress that was barely there, all silk and strategic cuts, the kind of thing designed to make a man forget his own name. "This is the one." Paula looked at it, her heart beginning to race. It was beautiful. It was daring. It was the exact opposite of everything the Lloyd family would consider appropriate. "It's perfect," she breathed. The shop owner, an older woman named Nadine, who'd dressed Paula for her first teaching job, smiled knowingly. "You getting your power back, baby?" "Something like that." "Good. A woman should never shrink herself to fit someone else's idea of who she should be. Not even for love. Especially not for love." Paula bought the dress along with others, a whole wardrobe of rebellion, of refusal to disappear. As they loaded bags into the car, Keisha asked, "So what's the plan? When are you deploying this weapon?" Paula thought about Peter's schedule, the patterns she'd learned by watching him avoid her. There was an important meeting coming up, she knew. Something he'd been preparing for. Something that would demand his complete attention. Perfect. Soon, Paula said. When he least expects it. They drove back to the mansion, and Paula felt lighter than she had in weeks. Keisha helped her bring the bags up to her room, and they spent the afternoon like they used to, laughing, gossiping, being themselves without apology. "I've missed this," Paula said. "Missed being able to just exist without wondering if I'm appropriate enough, or Lloyd enough, or whatever impossible standard I'm supposed to meet." "You know you can leave, right?" Keisha said seriously. "If this doesn't work, if he doesn't wake up, you're not trapped here. You have people who love you, a life waiting for you outside these walls." "I know, but I need to try this first. Need to know I did everything I could before I walk away." Dinah appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Lloyd," Mr. Peter called. "He won't be home for dinner. He has a meeting that will run late." Of course he did. Paula thanked Dinah and tried to ignore the familiar sting of disappointment. "He's still running," Keisha observed after Dinah left. "Let him run," Paula said. "He's about to discover that I won't be here waiting when he finally stops." After Keisha left, Paula spent the evening preparing. Not for Peter, for herself. She took a long bath, the kind she used to take in her old apartment when she needed to remember her own worth. She cared for her skin, her hair, her body, with the kind of attention she'd been neglecting. She looked at herself in the mirror, really looked, and tried to see what Peter saw, or what he would see if he ever bothered to look. She was beautiful. There was no arrogance in acknowledging it, just fact. Her dark skin glowed with health. Her eyes were bright despite the pain of recent weeks. Her body was strong, curved, undeniably desirable. Peter Lloyd was a fool for ignoring her, and it was time he learned exactly what his cowardice was costing him. Paula tried on the dress she'd bought, the silk one that barely contained her, that clung to every curve, that whispered promises of everything Peter had been denying himself. Looking at her reflection, she barely recognized herself, not because she looked different, but because she looked like herself again, powerful, unapologetic, magnificent. This was the woman Peter had pursued. This was who she'd been before the Lloyd family had tried to reshape her into something more palatable, more appropriate, more diminished. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother. "Baby, I'm praying for you. Remember, you are somebody with or without that man. Don't ever forget that." Paula typed back, "I won't, Mama. I promise." She thought about her mother's story, the one she'd told Keisha, about how Paula's father had almost lost her by taking her for granted, about how Miriam Leal had stopped being available, stopped waiting, stopped making her life revolve around a man who couldn't see her value. And Paula's father had woken up, had realized what he was losing, had fought to win her back, to prove he deserved her, to show he could be the husband she needed. Would Peter do the same? Paula didn't know, but she was about to find out. She hung the dress carefully in her closet, her fingers trailing over the silk. Soon, very soon, Peter would have to make a choice. His empire or his wife, his father's approval or his own happiness. The cold Lloyd legacy or the possibility of something warm, something real, something worth having. Paula's phone buzzed again, a text from Dominic. "Saw Peter at the office today. He looks like hell. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Keep it up." She smiled. Good. Let Peter suffer the way she'd been suffering. Let him feel the weight of loneliness, of being ignored, of sleeping alone while his spouse slept somewhere else. Let him understand what these months had cost her. And then, when he was at his most vulnerable, when he thought he had everything under control, that's when Paula would strike. She would send him that photograph, that single perfect image that would shatter his carefully maintained composure. That would make him remember she was a woman, not a portrait on the wall. That would remind him what he'd been too afraid to touch. Paula lay in her empty bed that night, not with sadness or resignation, but with anticipation. The old Paula, the one who'd taught children, who'd laughed freely, who'd never diminished herself for anyone, was coming back, and she was bringing fire. Peter thought he could keep her at a distance forever. He thought his empire and his father's approval were worth more than love. He thought he could have everything without risking anything. He was wrong. And very soon he would learn exactly how wrong he'd been. Paula closed her eyes and let herself imagine it. Peter in his boardroom, surrounded by important people, discussing millions and mergers. And then his phone, lighting up with her image. The shock on his face. The desire he couldn't control. The moment he realized that ignoring her hadn't made her less powerful. It had made her dangerous. She would make him choose, not with words this time, but with a reminder of everything he was sacrificing. And whatever he chose, her or his empire, love or legacy, at least she would finally know the truth. And if he chose wrong, if he stayed in his boardroom, in his comfortable prison of duty and expectation, then Paula Leal would walk out of the Lloyd mansion with her head held high. And Peter would spend the rest of his life regretting the woman he'd been too afraid to love. Either way, she would stop being invisible. Either way, she would reclaim herself. The revolution was about to begin, and Paula was ready for war. Chapter 7. The Photograph That Shattered Empires. In the glass tower of Lloyd Industries, Peter sat in a meeting worth hundreds of millions and never saw the bomb his wife was about to drop into his carefully controlled world. The conference room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The table was imported marble, Every chair cost more than most people earned in a month. This was Lloyd territory, where Peter had always felt powerful, in control. Today, that control felt like sand slipping through his fingers. He'd barely slept since the gala, since Paula had looked at him with eyes that held heartbreak and resignation. No more chances, Peter. Her words echoed at the worst possible moments, but today required his full attention. The Hashimoto deal, months of negotiation, hundreds of millions in potential revenue. Kenji Tanaka sat across from him, flanked by advisors, all wearing expressions of polite skepticism. There could be no distractions. Garrett Finch was presenting projections, his voice confident. Duncan Lloyd sat at the head of the table, watching everything, watching Peter especially, as if waiting for him to fail. "The infrastructure is already in place," Garrett was saying. "Implementation could begin within the quarter." Peter's phone buzzed. He glanced at it reflexively and felt his heart stop. Paula, she'd sent a photograph. His hand moved toward the phone before his brain could stop it. He touched the screen, opening the message, and everything, the boardroom, the deal, the empire, disappeared. Paula, in silk that barely covered her. Every curve visible, celebrated, impossible to look away from. Her dark skin glowed against the deep purple fabric. Her eyes looked directly at the camera, at him, with a challenge that made his blood ignite. This was his wife, his Paula, the woman he'd been ignoring for 3 months. She was breathtaking. She was devastating. She was reminding him of everything he'd been denying himself. "Peter?" Garrett's voice cut through the haze. Peter looked up, realizing everyone was staring. Papers had fallen from his hands. His chest was heaving. His hands were trembling. He couldn't form words. All he could see was Paula in silk. Peter Duncan's voice was sharp. "Are you listening?" But Peter wasn't listening. He was staring at that photograph. 3 months of denial, of distance, all of it evaporated in the face of this single image. He wanted her. He'd always wanted her. And the only thing that had stopped him was fear. Fear of his father's disapproval. Fear of losing focus. Fear of becoming someone who chose love over legacy. Fear of admitting he needed her more than anything else. But looking at this photograph, Peter realized he'd already lost. By trying to protect his empire, he'd destroyed his marriage. By refusing to be weak, he'd become the weakest version of himself, because an empire without her was meaningless. Kenji Tanaka cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take a break." Distracted. The word was laughable. Peter wasn't distracted. He was coming apart. His phone felt like it was burning. Paula's image was seared into his retinas. Suddenly, sitting in this boardroom felt like the most absurd waste of time imaginable. His wife was at home, alone, after 3 months of him failing her. And instead of begging, she'd done something brilliant. She'd reminded him exactly what he stood to lose. "Peter," Garrett said, concern creeping into his voice. "Perhaps you should—" Peter stood up. The chair scraped loudly. Everyone stared. "I need to leave," he said. Duncan's expression hardened. Sit down. This meeting is crucial." No, the word felt foreign. He'd never defied his father directly. "Nothing matters except fixing what I've broken. You walk out of this room, and you're proving me right," Duncan said. "Proving that you're too weak to lead. That your marriage was a mistake." Peter stopped at the door and turned back. His father sat there, face carved from stone, the powerful man who'd built an empire through ruthless determination and emotional isolation. Peter had spent his entire life trying to become that man, and in that moment, Peter realized he didn't want it anymore. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't have what it takes to be a Lloyd, not your kind. The kind who sacrifices everything human for success. The kind who dies surrounded by wealth, but completely alone." Duncan's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "I've watched you my entire life," Peter continued. "Watched you ignore Mom, watched you train the softness out of me. Watched you build an empire while destroying a family." He looked at the photograph again. "But Paula taught me something, that being human isn't weakness. That the only thing worth building is a life that means something. Sentimental nonsense, Duncan said coldly. Maybe, but I already regret the last 3 months. I regret every morning I left her alone. Every night I chose this building over our bed. Peter slipped his phone into his pocket. So yes, I'm walking out. I'm risking your approval, possibly destroying my position. Because none of it matters if I lose her. Only Dominic, sitting quietly in the corner, smiled. About damn time, his brother said. Peter walked to the door. I'm sorry I'm not the son you wanted, but I can't be him anymore. I'd rather be the husband Paula deserves. You'll lose everything, Duncan warned. No, Peter said. I already almost lost everything. Now I'm trying to get it back. He walked out. Behind him, the boardroom erupted, but Peter didn't hear it. He was already running, his heart pounding. Leonard jumped up as Peter stormed past. Sir, the meeting, reschedule it, cancel it. I don't care. But Mr. Lloyd, tell him I quit. Leonard's face went white. You, what? But Peter was already at the elevator. It took too long. All he could think about was Paula, waiting at home, wondering if he'd seen the photograph. It had changed everything. The elevator doors finally opened. Peter stepped in, hitting the button for the garage. As the doors closed, he saw his reflection, tie loose, hair disheveled, eyes burning with intensity. He looked like a man who'd finally woken up, like someone Paula Leal might actually want to be married to. The elevator moved at a glacial pace. Peter pulled out his phone and stared at the photograph again. God, she was beautiful. How had he convinced himself he could keep her at arm's length? He'd been so stupid. The doors opened. Peter ran to his car, ignoring confused looks. His hands shook as he started the engine. The tires squealed as he pulled out. Every red light was torture. Every slow driver was an enemy. His mind raced with everything he needed to say, everything he'd been too afraid to admit. He'd spent 3 months protecting his empire. Now he was about to risk it all for the only thing that actually mattered. Paula had sent him that photograph as a challenge, a test, a final chance to prove he could choose her. And Peter Lloyd, for the first time in his life, was choosing love. He just hoped he wasn't too late. Chapter 8. The Race Toward Reckoning. Peter Lloyd had built his empire on control. But as his car tore through the city streets, control was the one thing he'd completely lost. He drove like a man possessed. Weaving between lanes, his expensive car turned into a weapon against time and distance. Every traffic light that forced him to stop felt like personal torture. Every pedestrian crossing the street was an obstacle between him and redemption. His phone rang. Duncan, Peter, declined the call. It rang again. Garrett declined again. Juliet declined. He didn't have time for their lectures, their disappointment, their attempts to pull him back into the cold world of Lloyd expectations. He'd lived in that world for 30-some years, and it had given him everything except the one thing he actually needed, a life worth living. The city blurred past. Peter's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. His mind raced faster than the car, filling with images of Paula. Paula on their wedding day, radiant and hopeful. Paula eating breakfast alone in that enormous dining room. Paula at the gala, magnificent and hurt, telling him she was done waiting. Paula in that photograph, reminding him that he'd married a woman, not a painting. A living, breathing, desirable woman who'd somehow loved him despite his best efforts to push her away. How had he wasted 3 months? How had he convinced himself that distance was protection? How had he looked at that beautiful woman every day and not fallen to his knees in gratitude that she'd chosen him? His father's voice echoed in his head. Love makes you weak. Attachment makes you vulnerable. Lloyd men don't need anyone. But Peter was beginning to understand that his father had it backwards. Loneliness was the real weakness. Isolation was the vulnerability. Being so afraid of needing someone that you never let yourself truly live, that was the most pathetic existence imaginable. Another red light. Peter sat there, his heart hammering, his chest tight with the weight of everything he needed to say. What if she didn't forgive him? What if 3 months of neglect had killed whatever love she'd once felt? What if sending that photograph hadn't been an invitation, but a goodbye? A final reminder of what he'd lost through his own cowardice. The thought made him sick. The light changed. He accelerated, his mind spinning through memories. The day he'd met Paula at the community center, watching her teach a little girl to read. The patience in her voice, the warmth in her eyes. The way she'd looked at that child like she was the most important person in the world. Peter had fallen in love in that moment, though he hadn't recognized it as love. He'd just known he needed to be near this woman who gave so much of herself without expecting anything in return. He remembered their first real conversation. Paula had been cleaning up the center after hours, and Peter had stayed to help. She'd asked him why he was really there. No one volunteered just to volunteer, she'd said. Everyone had an angle. Maybe I don't have an angle, he'd replied. Everyone has an angle, especially billionaires. How did you know Google? She'd smiled, amused by his surprise. Peter Lloyd, CEO of Lloyd Industries, son of Duncan Lloyd, worth more money than I'll see in 10 lifetimes. So what's a man like you doing alphabetizing children's books in a community center? He'd been honest with her in a way he'd never been honest with anyone, trying to remember what it's like to do something that matters. That honesty had been the foundation of their relationship. Paula had seen through his wealth, his name, his carefully constructed persona. She'd seen him, the man underneath, the one who was lonely and lost and drowning in expectations, and she'd loved that man, had agreed to marry him despite knowing it would mean entering a world designed to reject her. What had he given her in return? A cold mansion, a colder family, and a husband who was too much of a coward to actually be a husband. Peter's phone rang again. This time it was Dominic. He answered, putting it on speaker. You actually left, Dominic said, and there was approval in his voice. You really walked out of that meeting? I had to. Dad's losing his mind. Garrett's talking about emergency board meetings. They think you've had a breakdown. Maybe I have, Peter said. Or maybe I'm finally sane after years of being crazy. Paula? Dominic asked. Paula, Peter confirmed. She sent me a photograph. Must have been some photograph. It was. But more than that, it was a wake-up call. Dom, I've been destroying my marriage to protect an empire that doesn't mean anything without her. I've been so busy being afraid of turning into Dad that I've been turning into him anyway. Dominic was quiet for a moment. You know this might cost you everything, right? The company, Dad's approval, your position. I know. And you're okay with that? Peter thought about his life. The boardrooms and the lonely nights, the success and the emptiness, the wealth and the poverty of connection. I'd rather have nothing and have Paula than have everything and lose her. Good, Dominic said simply. Because she deserves that. She deserves someone who chooses her first, not second, not eventually first. They hung up. Peter was close to the mansion now, could see it rising in the distance like a beautiful prison. He'd grown up in that house, had watched his mother fade away inside it, had witnessed Juliet learn to be cold there, had become the man his father wanted him to be within those walls, and he'd brought Paula into it. Like throwing a bird into a cage and wondering why it stopped singing. He pulled into the driveway, too fast, gravel spraying, abandoned his car with the door open, the engine still running, ran toward the entrance with single-minded desperation. Dinah met him in the foyer, her eyes wide. Mr. Lloyd, where is she? Your wife is upstairs. But, sir, perhaps you should... Peter was already taking the stairs 2 at a time. His heart pounded in his ears. Sweat dampened his collar. He'd walked out of a meeting worth hundreds of millions, had defied his father for the first time in his life, had possibly destroyed his career, and all of it would be worth it if Paula gave him one more chance. He reached the top of the staircase and stopped. Paula stood there, as if she'd been waiting for him. She'd changed out of the silk from the photograph, or had that been taken earlier, and wore a simple dress now, her feet bare, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. You came, she said quietly. Of course I came. Did you think—" His voice broke. "Paula, did you think I wouldn't?" "I didn't know." Her eyes searched his face. 3 months, Peter. 3 months of you choosing everything else over me. Why should today be different?" "Because I can't do this anymore," he said, and the words came out desperate, raw. "I can't keep pretending I don't need you. I can't keep hiding from how much I love you. I can't keep living this half-life where I have everything except the only thing that matters." He moved toward her, and she didn't step back. That alone felt like victory. "I saw your photograph," he continued. "I was in the most important meeting of my career, surrounded by people who could make or break the company, and all I could think about was you. How beautiful you are, how I've been ignoring you, how I've been the worst husband imaginable. Peter, let me finish, please." He reached for her hands, and when she let him take them, his chest loosened slightly. "My father told me on our wedding day that I had to choose. You or the company, love or legacy. And I've been trying to have both, trying to find some middle ground where I could keep everyone happy. But there is no middle ground. There's just you and everything else. And I choose you." Paula's eyes were wet with unshed tears. "You walked out of your meeting." "Then I left my father sitting there. Left Garrett trying to explain. Left a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'd do it again. I'd do it 1,000 times." He pulled her closer. "Because you were right at the gala. I've been surviving instead of living. I've been so afraid of needing you that I've made both of us miserable." "What about your father?" Paula asked. "What about the company? What about everything you've worked for?" "They can have it," Peter said fiercely. "All of it. The company, the legacy, the Lloyd name, none of it matters if I lose you. I'd rather be poor and loved than wealthy and alone." Paula stared at him, and Peter could see the war in her eyes, the desire to believe him fighting against the memory of 3 months of disappointment. "Pretty words," she said finally. "You're good at those. I know. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've used up every chance you should have given me. But Paula," his voice cracked completely, "I'm begging you. One more chance. Let me prove I can be the husband you deserve. Let me show you that I meant every promise I made on our wedding day." She pulled her hands away, and Peter felt his heart shatter. But then she raised one hand to his face, her fingers tracing his jaw with a gentleness he didn't deserve. 3 months, she whispered. 3 months, Peter. 3 months I waited. 3 months I slept alone. 3 months I wondered if you even remembered you had a wife. "I remembered every second," he said, leaning into her touch like a man starved. "Every second I wanted to come to you. Every night I ached to hold you. I was just too much of a coward to do it. And now I'm done being a coward. Now I'm choosing you over everything else. Now I'm finally ready to be your husband instead of my father's son." Paula looked at him with those beautiful eyes, and Peter waited for judgment, for forgiveness, for rejection, for whatever she decided he deserved. And then she spoke words he hadn't dared to hope for. "Then prove it." "How?" he asked desperately. "Tell me how. I'll do anything." Her smile was small, sad, but there. "You walked out of your empire to come home to me. That's a start. But if you really want this marriage, Peter, if you really want me, you're going to have to do more than grand gestures. You're going to have to show up every day. Fight for us every day. Choose me every day. Not just when I send you pictures. Not just when you're afraid of losing me. Every single day." "I can do that," he said. "I will do that." "Can you?" Paula's voice held challenge now. "Can you really? When your father calls and demands you come back? When Garrett tells you you're losing your edge? When the board questions your commitment? Can you still choose me then?" "Yes." The word came out fierce, certain. "Yes, Paula. Every time, forever." She studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she stepped back. 3 months you made me wait," she said. "Now it's your turn." His heart stopped. "What?" "I sent you that picture to remind you what you've been ignoring. To make you see me. You've seen me now. You've chosen to come home. But that doesn't erase 3 months of pain, Peter. That doesn't fix everything with one dramatic gesture. Paula, please." "No." Her voice was firm but not cruel. "You asked me to teach you how to be my husband. To be vulnerable, to be human. This is how. You wait. You show me that today wasn't just panic or lust or fear of loss. You prove that you meant what you said." Peter's hands were shaking with the need to touch her, to pull her close, to erase the distance he'd created. But looking at her, this strong, beautiful woman who'd survived 3 months of his neglect, he understood. She wasn't being cruel. She was being smart. She was protecting herself from being hurt again, and he had no right to ask her not to. "How long?" he asked quietly. "As long as it takes," Paula said. "Until I believe you. Until I trust that you won't run back to your safe, cold world the moment things get difficult." She turned to walk away, and Peter forced himself to stay still. This was the cost of his cowardice, watching her walk away when all he wanted was to hold her. But then she paused at her bedroom door and looked back at him. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I'm glad you came home. I'm glad you chose me. I just need to know if you'll still choose me tomorrow. And the day after. And the day after that. I will," he promised. "Every day for the rest of my life I'll choose you." "Then prove it," she said, and went inside, closing the door gently behind her. Peter stood alone in the hallway, his chest heaving, his hands trembling, his heart simultaneously breaking and healing. He'd left his empire to come home to his wife. He'd defied his father. He'd risked everything, and now he had to wait. Had to prove that he meant every word. Had to show Paula that he was finally ready to be the husband she deserved. It would be the hardest thing he'd ever done. Harder than building a company. Harder than earning his father's approval. Harder than anything in his carefully controlled life. But looking at that closed door, knowing Paula was on the other side, Peter realized he would wait, as long as it took. Would do whatever she asked. Would prove himself every single day until she believed him. Because losing her wasn't an option. Not anymore. Not ever again. Chapter 9. The Night of Truth. Paula heard his car screech into the driveway. She heard his footsteps pound through the marble halls. She heard him calling her name with a desperation that would have satisfied her 3 months ago. But tonight, it was only the beginning. She'd been standing at the top of the staircase for 10 minutes, her heart hammering, her resolve wavering with every passing second. Sending that photograph had been both the bravest and most terrifying thing she'd ever done. What if he didn't come? What if he saw it and chose his empire anyway? But he'd come. He'd left his meeting, his father, his entire world, and he'd come home to her. Now he stood before her, looking like a man who'd run through fire to get here. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild with hunger and desperation. This wasn't the cold, controlled Peter Lloyd the world knew. This was the man underneath, raw, vulnerable, finally human. Paula. He breathed her name like a prayer. And she'd made him wait. Made him understand that coming home once didn't erase 3 months of absence. That loving her meant more than one grand gesture. It meant showing up every single day. The look on his face when she'd closed the door had almost broken her resolve. Pain, understanding, acceptance. He hadn't argued or demanded or tried to use his wealth or power to change her mind. He'd just accepted her terms, even though they were clearly killing him. Good. He needed to understand what these 3 months had felt like for her. Paula sat on her bed, still in the simple dress she'd changed into after taking the photograph. That silk masterpiece hung in her closet now, a weapon successfully deployed. It had brought Peter home. Now she needed to see if he would stay. Her phone buzzed. "Keisha, did it work? Please tell me it worked." Paula typed back, "He came home. Left his meeting, everything. He's here. And are you finally getting your husband back?" "I made him wait." There was a long pause before Keisha's response came through. "Damn, girl. You're stronger than I thought. How long are you going to make him wait?" Paula stared at the closed door, knowing Peter was probably still standing in the hallway. "Until I believe him. Do you think you will?" Believe him? That was the question, wasn't it? Paula had seen the desperate sincerity in Peter's eyes, had heard the raw emotion in his voice, had watched him literally shake with the effort of not reaching for her. But she'd also spent 3 months being disappointed. 3 months of hope dying a little more each day. 3 months learning that love alone wasn't enough. You needed actions, presence, commitment. "I want to," Paula typed back. "God, Keisha, I want to so badly. But I'm terrified that if I give in now, if I let him think one dramatic gesture fixes everything, we'll end up right back where we started." "You're right to make him work for it. But baby, don't punish him so long that you both end up more broken than you already are. There's a difference between making him prove himself and torturing you both out of pride." Paula set her phone down and walked to the window. The grounds were dark, the gardens invisible in the night. Somewhere in this mansion, Peter was probably pacing, agonizing, figuring out how to prove himself. A soft knock made her turn. "Paula," Peter's voice came through the door, tentative. "I'm not asking to come in. I need to talk to you, please." She walked to the door but didn't open it. "I can hear you." "I called Dominic," Peter said. "Told him to handle my father and the board. I'm not going back to the office until you and I fix this. I don't care what it costs me." Paula pressed her palm against the door, imagining him on the other side. "What did Dominic say?" "That I should have done this 3 months ago." "He's right," Peter's voice cracked. "Everyone was right. My mother, Dominic, you all saw what I was too blind to see. That I was destroying the only good thing in my life because I was too afraid to actually live. Fear is a reason, Peter, but it's not an excuse." "I know. I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to explain." She heard him slide down the door, heard him sitting on the floor. "When I was a kid, my father took me to the office every weekend. I was maybe 7 or 8. He'd sit me in a chair in his office and make me watch him work. Hours and hours, Paula. And if I complained or got bored or asked to go home, he'd tell me that Lloyd men don't quit, that weak men prioritize comfort over success, that feelings were just distractions from what really mattered." Paula sat down on her side of the door, her back against the wood. "They were separated by inches and by 3 months of damage. My mother tried to fight it at first," Peter continued. "She'd argue with him, tell him I was just a child, that I needed to play and be happy. And he'd look at her with this expression, not anger, just complete dismissal, like she was an irrelevant obstacle to his plans. Eventually she stopped fighting, stopped trying to protect me, just faded into the background of her own life. That's not going to be me," Paula said firmly. "I won't fade away. I won't become a ghost in my own marriage. I know. That's why I love you. You're strong enough to fight for yourself, even against me." She heard him shift, imagined him leaning his head back against the door. I thought I could have both, you and the Empire, your love and my father's approval. But there is no both. There's just choosing you or choosing to be like him. And Paula, I can't be him. I don't want to be him, even if it means losing everything else. What if your father forces you to choose? What if the board removes you? What if you lose Lloyd Industries completely? Then I'll start something new, something that's mine, not his legacy, something where I can be human instead of a machine." Peter's voice was steady now, certain. "I've spent my whole life building someone else's dream. Maybe it's time I build my own. And maybe that dream looks like a small apartment and a teaching job and a wife who loves me, not because of what I have, but because of who I am." Paula felt tears threatening. This was what she'd wanted to hear since their wedding day, that she mattered more than the Empire, that he saw her, that he was willing to risk everything for them. But words were easy, actions were harder. "My mother told me a story once," Paula said softly, "about how my father almost lost her. He was proud, stubborn, couldn't admit he was wrong." "Sound familiar?" She heard Peter's quiet laugh. "Very. My father worked 2 jobs, was never home, kept saying he was doing it for the family. But my mother was lonely. She started wondering if she'd married a man or a bank account. So one day she stopped waiting for him, stopped making dinner, stopped asking about his day, stopped being available whenever he finally noticed her. What happened? He panicked. Suddenly, the woman who'd always been there wasn't, and he realized he'd been taking her for granted, assuming she'd wait forever. So he quit one of his jobs, started coming home, started actually being present. And they built a real marriage. Not perfect, but real. Is that what you're doing? Peter asked. Showing me that you won't wait forever? I'm showing you that I'm a person, not a possession. That being married to you doesn't mean accepting whatever scraps of attention you're willing to give. That if you want a real wife, you have to be a real husband. There was a long silence. Then Peter said, I've been thinking about that community center. The one where we met. What about it? They're struggling. Not enough funding, not enough volunteers. I could help, not as Peter Lloyd the billionaire throwing money at a problem, but as someone who shows up and does the work. The way I did when I was trying to get you to notice me. Paula's heart squeezed. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that I remember who I was when you fell in love with me. That man got lost somewhere between our wedding and now. But I'm going to find him again. Not for show, not to impress you, but because he's who I actually am, underneath all the Lloyd expectations. Paula stood and opened the door. Peter was sitting on the floor, looking up at her with eyes that held so much hope and fear, it was almost painful to witness. Stand up, she said quietly. He did, his movements careful, like he was afraid she'd change her mind and close the door again. They stood facing each other in the dim hallway light, close enough to touch, but not touching. 3 months, Paula said, and her voice trembled despite her resolve. 3 months, Peter. 3 months you made me wait. Now you understand what that felt like. I do, he said. And I'm sorry. God, Paula, I'm so sorry. For our wedding night, for every morning I left early, for every evening I chose work over you, for making you feel invisible, for being the worst husband imaginable. If we do this, if we really try to make this marriage real, it won't be like before. I won't be managed or scheduled or fit into your empire's convenient time slots. I'll be your partner, your equal, your wife, not your trophy or your obligation or your distraction. Yes, he breathed. Anything, everything. Just tell me how to fix this. You can't fix 3 months of damage in one night, Peter. That's not how this works. His face fell, but he nodded. I understand. Whatever you need. However long it takes. Paula looked at him, this powerful man brought to his knees by love. This billionaire who'd walked away from millions to come home to her. This husband who was finally seeing her as more than an inconvenient complication to his carefully controlled life. She thought about her mother's advice. Don't punish him so long that you both end up more broken than you already are. She thought about Dinah's words. You have fire. Don't let them extinguish it. She thought about the woman she'd been before the Lloyd family. The woman who'd never diminished herself for anyone. The woman who knew her worth and demanded that others see it too. And she made a decision. When your father questions me again, she said, when your mother treats me like I don't belong, when that board of yours tries to make you choose, I choose you, Peter said fiercely, stepping closer. Over the empire, over my father's approval, over everything. These 3 months taught me. I already lost everything that mattered by pushing you away. She looked into his eyes, searching for lies, finding only desperate truth. Her armor, the pride, the anger, the hurt began to crack. Peter, I love you, he said. The words exploding out like a confession he couldn't contain any longer. I've loved you since the day we met. That's why I ran. That's why I hid. Because loving you meant admitting I wasn't the man my father built me to be. Loving you meant being weak. Love isn't weakness, Paula interrupted, her own tears falling now. Love is the only thing that makes us strong enough to be real. He reached for her then, his hands hovering near her face, asking permission. She didn't pull away. His palms cupped her cheeks, his touch so gentle it made her ache. I'm begging you, he whispered. One more chance. Let me prove I meant every promise I made on our wedding day. Let me show you I can be the husband you deserve. Paula closed her eyes, feeling his warmth, his presence, the electricity that had always sparked between them. 3 months of denying this.
3 months of sleeping alone.
3 months of dying a little each day in her golden cage. She was tired of dying, tired of being alone, tired of protecting herself from the one person she'd promised to share her life with, but she was also terrified. Terrified of believing him and being disappointed again. Terrified of giving him her heart and watching him run back to his safe, cold world. Terrified of becoming Constance, elegant, refined, and completely hollow. "You're going to have to work for this," she said, opening her eyes. "Court me, date me. Prove that you're not going to disappear the moment your empire calls." "I'll prove it," he vowed. "Every day. Starting now. Starting now." She couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. "Mr. Lloyd, you left a meeting worth hundreds of millions. Aren't you worried about your empire?" Peter looked at her, his beautiful, brilliant, impossible wife, and something shifted in his expression. Not hunger, though that was there. Not desperation, though he felt that too. But something deeper, certainty, peace, the look of a man who'd finally found his way home after being lost for years. "Let the empire burn," he said. And then, finally, after 3 months of distance and denial and desperate longing, Peter Lloyd kissed his wife. Not the polite kiss of their wedding day, but a kiss filled with every day of hunger, every night of regret, every moment of love he'd been too afraid to show. Paula melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, erasing every inch of space between them. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her slightly, and she gasped against his mouth. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Paula pressed her forehead to his. "You're going to have to do more than kiss me to fix 3 months of damage," she warned, but her voice was softer now, less guarded. "I know," he said, "but it's a start." She looked up at him, studying his face, the face she'd memorized during their courtship, the face that had become a stranger's during their marriage, the face that was finally looking at her like she was the center of his universe again. "You really left everything to come home to me," she said, wonder creeping into her voice. "I didn't leave everything. I left nothing, because without you, that's all it was. Nothing with a price tag." His hands framed her face again, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You are everything, Paula. My home, my heart, my reason for getting up in the morning. I just forgot that for a while. Let fear make me stupid. But I remember now. And tomorrow, when your father calls, when reality sets in, tomorrow I'll choose you again. And the day after that, and every day for the rest of my life." He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then her nose, gentle kisses that felt like promises. "You said I need to prove myself. Tell me how." "I'll do anything." Paula pulled back slightly, her hands still on his chest. She could feel his heart racing, matching hers. "Move into our bedroom. Not just tonight, but every night. No more sleeping in your study. Done. Have breakfast with me. Actual breakfast, where we sit and talk like normal people who care about each other. Every morning. I promise. And when your father demands you come back, when he tells you I'm ruining your life, when he tries to make you choose, I'll tell him I already chose. That my wife and my marriage matter more than his empire. That I'm done living his life and I'm ready to start living mine." Peter's voice was fierce, certain. "I'll tell him he can keep his company if it means keeping his loneliness. That I'd rather have you and nothing than everything without you." Paula searched his face, looking for doubt, finding none. "This is going to be hard, Peter. Your family won't accept this easily. The board will fight you. You might lose everything you've worked for." "I already almost lost everything I've worked for," he said. "And it wasn't the company. It was you." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt. But belief was fragile after 3 months of disappointment. "Show me," she said finally. "Not with words, but with actions. Show me that today wasn't just panic or lust or fear of loss. Show me that you meant it." "How?" he asked desperately. "Tell me how and I'll do it." Paula took his hand and led him toward their bedroom. Their bedroom, not his study, not some separate space where he could hide from intimacy. The room they were supposed to share as husband and wife. "Start by staying," she said. "Stay with me tonight. Hold me, talk to me. Be my husband instead of a stranger who happens to share my last name." Peter's eyes filled with tears. "I can do that. God, Paula, I want nothing more than to do that." She opened the bedroom door and pulled him inside. The room was still filled with the flowers from their wedding night, now dried and faded, a reminder of promises made and broken. Paula walked to them and swept them off the dresser into the trash. "Old promises," she said. "We're making new ones now." Peter watched her, his expression full of understanding. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about rebuilding everything they'd destroyed through neglect and fear. This was about starting over, wiser and scarred, but hopefully stronger. "I'm scared," Paula admitted, the words soft but honest. "Scared that tomorrow you'll wake up and regret this. That you'll remember all the reasons you kept your distance. That I'll end up alone again." Peter crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her close. "I'm scared too," he said against her hair. "Scared that I've hurt you too badly to fix. Scared that I don't know how to be what you need. Scared that I'll fail you again." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "But I'm more scared of losing you. So I'm going to try. I'm going to fight for us every day. And when I mess up, because I probably will, I'm going to own it and fix it instead of running away." Paula felt something shift inside her. Not complete trust, that would take time, but hope. Real, cautious, fragile hope that maybe they could build something from the ruins of these 3 months. That maybe Peter Lloyd could learn to be human. That maybe their marriage could become real instead of just legal. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Peter, one more chance. But this is it. This is the last time I give you pieces of my heart and hope you don't break them. If you run again, if you choose your empire again, if you make me invisible again, I'm done. I'll leave this mansion, this family, this marriage, and I won't look back." "I understand," he said. "And I won't run. I promise you, Paula, I won't run." They stood there in the fading light of their bedroom, holding each other, both of them damaged and hopeful and terrified and determined. Outside, the Lloyd mansion held its breath. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tomorrow, Duncan would call. Tomorrow, reality would intrude on this fragile moment of connection. But tonight, finally, after 3 months of cold distance, tonight belonged to them. And in the quiet of their bedroom, as Peter held his wife and whispered promises into her hair, both of them dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could turn their beautiful prison into a home. Chapter 10. The Empire of Two. Some love stories begin with a kiss. Theirs began with surrender, not hers but his. The moment Peter Lloyd's knees hit the marble floor, the balance of power in their marriage shifted forever. Paula looked down at the man she'd married, this powerful, untouchable billionaire, now kneeling at her feet, and felt something more potent than victory. She felt the walls between them finally crumbling. They'd talked for hours, sitting on their bed like people who'd just met, learning each other all over again. Peter told her things he'd never told anyone, about growing up under Duncan's cold scrutiny, about watching his mother fade away, about the crushing weight of expectations that had turned him into someone he didn't recognize. And Paula had listened, her hand in his, finally understanding that his distance hadn't been rejection, it had been terror. But understanding wasn't the same as forgiveness, and forgiveness wasn't the same as trust. Now, as dawn began to paint the sky outside their window, Peter knelt before her, his eyes red from exhaustion and emotion. "Please," he whispered, looking up at her with tears streaming down his face. "Please, Paula, teach me how to be your husband. Because I don't know how to be anything but lonely anymore." Never in his life had Peter Lloyd begged. Not for anything, not from anyone. Men like him demanded, negotiated, commanded. They didn't kneel. They didn't cry. They didn't expose their broken hearts and pray someone would be gentle with the pieces. But here he was, his soul on fire with desperate need, his pride abandoned on the floor beside him. Paula reached down, her fingers trembling, and touched his face. He leaned into her palm like a man starved for affection, his eyes closing, a shuddering breath escaping his lips. "Stand up," she whispered. He did, his movements unsteady, his eyes never leaving hers. They stood face to face, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, see the vulnerability naked on his face, understand that this moment was changing everything. 3 months, she said, but this time her voice was softer, the edge of anger fading into something else. 3 months you made me wait. I know. His voice was hoarse from all the talking, all the confessing, all the breaking open. And I would give anything to take them back, to do it right from the beginning, to be the husband you deserved from our wedding night. You can't take them back, Paula said, but she stepped closer, her hands moving to his chest, feeling his heart race under her palms. But maybe you can make up for them. Starting now? How? He breathed, his hands hovering near her waist, asking permission. Tell me how. Paula looked into his eyes and saw everything she'd been searching for since their wedding day. Love, desire, vulnerability. The man underneath the Lloyd armor, finally brave enough to show himself. By staying, she said simply, by choosing me not just tonight but tomorrow and the day after, by fighting for us when it gets hard, by remembering that I'm not your enemy or your obligation. I'm your wife. You're more than my wife, Peter said fiercely, his hands finally settling on her waist, pulling her closer. You're my salvation, my reason for breathing, the only thing that makes this life worth living. He kissed her then, not the desperate kiss from the hallway, but something deeper. A kiss that tasted like tears and promises, like 3 months of hunger finally satisfied, like the beginning of something real. Paula kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, all her carefully maintained distance dissolving. She'd been so strong for so long, through 3 months of neglect, through the Lloyd family's cruelty, through the slow death of hope. But she was tired of being strong, tired of protecting herself, tired of sleeping alone while her husband existed somewhere else. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, Peter rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. I've loved you since the moment I saw you teaching that little girl to read. Since you told me money couldn't buy everything. Since you looked at me and saw past the Lloyd name to the man underneath. I know, Paula whispered. I've always known. That's what made these 3 months so painful, knowing you loved me, but watching you choose fear over that love. Never again, he vowed. Paula, I swear to you, never again. Whatever comes tomorrow, whatever my father throws at us, whatever it costs me, I'm choosing you. Always you. She believed him. Finally, after weeks of doubt and pain, she believed him. Not because his words were pretty, but because she'd watched him walk away from everything he'd been raised to value. Because he was here now, looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered. Then prove it, she said, but this time there was no challenge in her voice. Only invitation. Peter's eyes darkened with understanding. His hands tightened on her waist. Paula, make love to me, she said softly. Not because I sent you a picture, not because you're afraid of losing me, but because you're my husband, and I'm your wife, and we're finally ready to start this marriage for real. Something in Peter's expression cracked completely. He lifted her into his arms. She gasped, her arms wrapping around his neck, and carried her to their bed. Their bed, the one they'd been meant to share since their wedding night. I don't deserve you, he said, laying her down gently, his body hovering over hers. No, Paula agreed, pulling him down. But you're going to spend the rest of your life earning me anyway. What happened next was 3 months of denial catching fire. Peter touched her like a man, afraid this was a dream he'd wake from. Paula kissed him like a woman, reclaiming what had always been hers. They learned each other with desperate tenderness, whispered promises against skin, erased every lonely night with connection that was finally, beautifully real. And when they finally came together, when 3 months of distance collapsed into perfect intimacy, Peter said her name like a prayer, and Paula remembered why she'd married this man in the first place. Not for his wealth, not for his power, but for moments like this, when all the armor fell away and he was just Peter, just human, just hers. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, the morning sun streaming through windows, their breathing slowly returning to normal. Peter held her like he was afraid she'd disappear. Paula traced patterns on his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her fingertips. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "When your father calls. When the board demands explanations." Peter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been thinking about that. About what I actually want, not what I'm supposed to want. And I don't want to run Lloyd Industries anymore. I don't want to spend my life in boardrooms, making deals that make us richer, but don't make us happier. I don't want to become my father, winning at business and losing at life." He shifted to look at her. "I want to do something that matters. Maybe work with that community center. Maybe start a foundation that actually helps people instead of just looking good on paper. Maybe figure out who Peter Lloyd actually is, underneath all the Lloyd expectations." Paula's chest tightened with emotion. "Your father will never forgive you, I know. But I'm finally okay with that. I've spent my whole life chasing his approval, and even when I got it, it felt empty. Because it came at the cost of everything human in me." Peter kissed her forehead. "I'd rather have your love than his approval. I'd rather build something real with you than inherit an empire that makes us both miserable. What about money? If you walk away from the company, we'll have enough. More than enough. I have savings, investments that are mine, not the family's. We won't be billionaires, but we'll be comfortable. And if we're not—" He smiled, and it was the first real smile Paula had seen from him in months. "Then we'll figure it out together. Maybe live in a smaller place. Maybe I'll actually have to work for a living instead of inheriting everything. Maybe we'll be happier with less as long as we have each other." Paula stared at him, searching for doubt, finding none. "You really mean that? You'd give up everything?" "I'd give up anything for you. The company, the mansion, the Lloyd name, all of it. Because none of it matters without you." He cupped her face, his eyes intense. "You are my empire now, Paula. You and whatever life we build together. That's the only thing worth having." She kissed him deep and slow, pouring everything she felt into it. When they finally broke apart, she said, "I love you. Even when I was angry, even when I was hurt, I never stopped loving you. I know that's what I didn't deserve." Peter held her closer. "But I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my life becoming the man who does deserve it." They stayed in bed as the sun rose higher, talking about the future. Not the future Duncan Lloyd had planned, but their future. A life built on love instead of legacy. Choices made together instead of demands from family. Freedom to be human instead of pressure to be perfect. "Your mother is going to be difficult," Paula said eventually. "Constance won't understand why you'd walk away from all this." "Maybe she will," Peter said. "Maybe seeing someone actually choose love over duty will remind her of who she was before the Lloyd family crushed her spirit. Or maybe she'll hate us for it. Either way, we'll survive. And Juliet? Juliet will probably throw a fit. But Dominic will have our backs. He's always been the only one brave enough to actually live his own life." Paula thought about the Lloyd family. Cold, beautiful, trapped in their own wealth. She thought about Constance, elegant and hollow. About Duncan, powerful and alone. About Juliet, cruel because cruelty was the only language she'd been taught. "We're breaking the pattern," she said softly. "Yes," Peter agreed. "We're breaking the cycle. No more Lloyd men who can't love. No more Lloyd women who fade away. We're going to build something different, something warm, something real. Something that might not always be easy," Paula warned. "Nothing worth having is easy." Peter kissed her again, soft and sweet. "But with you, even the hard things feel possible." They eventually left their room, venturing down to the kitchen where Dinah was preparing breakfast. The housekeeper took one look at them. Peter's rumpled clothes, Paula's radiant face, both of them holding hands, and smiled. "Good morning." "Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd," she said, and this time the title felt real. They ate breakfast together, sitting close, talking about everything and nothing, making plans, dreaming dreams, learning to be what they should have been from the beginning, partners. Peter's phone rang. Duncan's name flashed on the screen. Peter looked at it, then at Paula, then declined the call. "Not today," he said. "Today belongs to us." It rang again. Garrett this time declined. Again. Juliet declined. Paula watched him silence the outside world, choosing her over all of them, and felt her last defenses crumble completely. This was it. This was the man she'd married, finally becoming the husband she needed. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. Peter's eyes shone with emotion. "I'm trying to be worthy of you. You're getting there." They spent the day together, something they hadn't done since before the wedding. Walking the grounds, making love, talking for hours, simply existing in the same space, without walls between them. By evening, Paula felt more connected to Peter than she'd felt in months. As they sat on the terrace watching the sunset, Peter said, "Tomorrow I'll call my father. I'll tell him I'm stepping back from the company, that I'm choosing a different path." "We'll call him," Paula corrected, "together, because whatever comes next, we face it together." Peter pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Together," he agreed. And so their real marriage began, not in the grand ceremony filled with wealth and glamour, but in the quiet aftermath of nearly losing each other. Not in the golden cage of Lloyd expectations, but in the freedom of finally choosing love over everything else. Peter Lloyd had built an empire of gold and steel, but that night, wrapped in his wife's arms, he understood that the only empire worth having was the one he could build with Paula, an empire of two, forged in fire, bound by desire, and unbreakable in love. Outside, the world waited with demands and consequences. Inside, they built something that would outlast any fortune, any legacy, any amount of wealth or power. They built a marriage, real, imperfect, passionate, and finally worth fighting for.